In the 1947 case of Everson versus Board of Education, the U.S. Supreme Court, for the very first time, interpreted the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which states that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion as effectuating a, quote, wall of separation between church and state. Justice Hugo Black's majority opinion in Everson thus resuscitated this hitherto obscure 233-word letter, aka a tweet, as my co-panelist said, by then-President Thomas Jefferson to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, in which the nation's third president used that precise phrase. Never mind that Jefferson's pithy and unremarkable letter was penned in a distinctly political context. He was trying to make inroads among the New England clergy, which at that time was more partial to the rival Federalist Party of John Adams, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and so forth. Never mind that the Jeffersonian conception of a so-called wall of separation between church and state has no textual, contextual, or historical basis whatsoever in the actual words or meaning of the First Amendment. Never mind that Jefferson himself personally was gallivanting off in revolutionary France during the debate over the very ratification of the Bill of Rights. The liberal misnomer of so-called separation of church and state soon ossified into a core tenet of America's post-war civic experience and a touchstone of the Supreme Court's First Amendment jurisprudence, and was all based on a tragic lie. As Justice William Rehnquist explained in his blistering dissent in the 1985 case Wallace versus Jaffrey, Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Association was a short note of courtesy, written 14 years after the amendments were passed by Congress. He would seem to any detached observer as a less than ideal source of contemporary history as to the meaning of the religion clauses of the First Amendment. But so-called separationism is not merely wrong as a constitutional matter. It has also led to results that are both ludicrous and tragic. The Supreme Court courtroom itself features a frieze of Moses holding the stone tablets on which the Ten Commandments are inscribed, but similar displays outside the marble palace are deemed presumptively suspect. The theologically heterodox Jefferson himself asserted in the Declaration of Independence that our rights and duties come from our Creator, but to posit as much today is to risk denunciation as a, quote, Christian nationalist. To outwardly display religiosity or personal piety in contemporary America is to invite secularist scorn, dismissal as a retrograde troglodyte, and probably a lawsuit to boot. The result is that religious Americans are made to feel like second-class citizens in their own country. This is true in private life, and it is only truer in the public square. But this is positively backwards, and don't just take it from me. As, yes, Barack Obama himself noted in a 2006 speech, quote, secularists are wrong when they ask believers to leave the religion at the door before entering into the public square. To say that men and women should not inject their personal morality into public policy debates is a practical absurdity. Our law is by definition a codification of morality, much of it grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is not often that I say this, but Barack Obama was precisely right. That's probably the first time that's ever been said here at a National Conservatism conference, I would submit to you. In recent years, the Roberts Court has led a course correction in Establishment Clause jurisprudence. In 2019, the court upheld the constitutionality of the Bladensburg, Maryland Peace Cross, a World War I memorial erected in 1925. In 2022, the court vindicated Coach Joseph Kennedy's right to lead a voluntary on-field prayer following high school football games, overturning the infamous 1971 case Lemon versus Kurtzman in the process. The highly dubious practice of permitting so-called offended observers to bring Establishment Clause challenges in court has not quite been fully eradicated, but it is very much on its last legs. The overall trend line, my friends, is positive. Yet separationism more broadly still remains. It is not merely the fact that Everson remains on the books at the Supreme Court, although it does and it should be overturned. Rather, at a deeper and more profound level, so-called separation of church and state remains a key civic framework inculcated in today's impressionable young Americans and the lens through which many naively come to understand the First Amendment. Unfortunately, most of the liberal American Jewish establishment defaults towards a position of ardent separationism. This is not only misguided, it is myopic and outright counterproductive. A legal and civic culture of separationism harms not only America's Christian majority and the American Republic as a whole, but it also harms Jewish-Christian relations and ultimately endangers American Jews themselves. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, an iconic liberal Jewish establishment institution, boasts on its website that it, quote, safeguards religious freedom for all Americans by protecting the separation of church and state mandated by the First Amendment. Two of the Supreme Court's then 3 Jewish justices joined the court majority opinion upholding the Bladensburg Peace Cross, but ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt nonetheless expressed, quote, alarm at how, quote, separation of church and state was purportedly undermined. Similarly, American Jewish Committee General Counsel Mark Sturm criticized the Peace Cross ruling as, quote, regrettable, and decried the Coach Kennedy ruling as a, quote, serious blow to, quote, separation of church and state. Just last month, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed a law making his state the very first to mandate display of the 10 Commandments in all public school classrooms from kindergarten all the way up through university. As Landry, himself a Catholic, said before signing the bill, quote, if you want to respect the rule of law, you got to start from the original lawgiver, which was Moses. He got his commandments from God. Unfortunately, the governor's lavish praise of Moses, who religious Jews consider the, quote, father of all the prophets that were before him and that arose after him, per Maimonides' well-known 13 Principles of Faith, well, this was not appreciated by secular Jewish families in Louisiana, 3 of whom immediately filed suit in federal court. The families cited concerns that their children might feel suppressed in expressing their own, quote, Jewish backgrounds and beliefs. One cannot help but wonder whether these families realize that it was the Jews themselves whom God chose as his intermediary for introducing the 10 Commandments to the world. There is so much else wrong with this picture that it is difficult to know where to begin. America, which was founded in 1776 with an appeal to our Creator, has long been a godlier nation than its peers. This godliness is one reason why John Winthrop first described America as a, quote, shining city upon a hill, and why Ronald Reagan reiterated that same sentiment centuries later. In a somewhat similar vein, the Jewish people themselves are famously called in the book of Isaiah to be a, quote, light unto the nations. In a great and godly country such as America, it is incumbent upon the original people of the book to be that light and to lead by example. As Rabbi Tuli Weiss recently wrote in the aftermath of Louisiana's signing of the 10 Commandments law, quote, a return to basic principles is in order and the Jewish community should promote biblical teachings. To oppose the introduction of biblical principles in the public square is to necessarily also undermine Jews' unique mission on earth, to be a light unto the nations by sanctifying God's name in all that we do. As a practical matter, the end of separationism and the return of Christianity to the public square would, perhaps counterintuitively to some, also do a great deal to safeguard the Jewish future in America itself. Look, one does not need a microscope to examine the origins of the recently ascendant anti-Semitism. It is almost entirely coming from woke leftist radicals who have replaced the one true God with the false gods of intersectionality, and who suffer from a debilitating case of Western civilizational self-hatred. What is needed to withstand and roll back totalizing woke revanchism is to cut through the liberal illusion of public values neutrality and promote an alternative affirmative conception of the good life, which in America means Judeo-Christian ecumenicism at a bare minimum, and in many instances, a Christian majority promoting Christianity to core. John Adams, one of the most devoutly Christian of the founding fathers, famously wrote that the Jews, quote, are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. Adams added, quote, they have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Adams' sentiment is hardly aberrant. Rather, he is representative of American Christianity, which has often tended toward philo-Semitism ever since the founding of the Republic. It is surely no coincidence that as regular church attendance has declined and secular wokeism has ascended, that anti-Semitism has in turn skyrocketed. In the year 2024, any Jewish American who throws in his lot with wokeism, and not the one entity actually capable of subduing wokeism, the American church, ought to have his head thoroughly examined. The more biblically oriented and the more authentically Christian America is, the better off both America and American Jews will be. The alternative paradigm, doctrinaire separationism, diminishes the very Bible that is the Jewish people's greatest inheritance, embitters the very Christians who are the greatest natural friends of both the Jewish people and the state of Israel, sours Jewish-Christian relations, and vitiates the only affirmative force capable of vanquishing the hegemonic wokeism that poses an existential threat to the American Jewish experience. Let me be blunt. American Jews should advocate for an American public square that is more explicitly oriented toward God and Scripture, even if that is not strictly limited to the shared ecumenical Judeo-Christian inheritance, such as the Ten Commandments, and will at times inevitably take the form of sectarian Christian iconography. I can hear liberal separationists blanching at that, somewhere in the background maybe. So let me try to assuage those concerns, albeit briefly. First, religious free exercise in America has probably never been more robustly enforced in the federal courts than it is right now. The Roberts Court has repeatedly strengthened religious liberty jurisprudence in the areas of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, aka RFRA, as well as the First Amendment's free exercise clause itself. It is also notable that the Supreme Court rendered a unanimous ruling in the 2023 Title VII case of Groff versus DeJoy, an opinion rightly celebrated by Orthodox Jewish organizations because it mandated greater workplace accommodation for Sabbath observers. Free exercise for religious minorities is very, very secure right now and is often not even a particularly divisive or contentious issue in the federal courts. Second, and more profoundly, over the longer run, American Jews need a stronger American church so that, in George Washington's famous words, the quote, "Children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to ever make him afraid." The present threat to American Jewry comes not from Christians, but from leftist intersectionalists and keffiyeh-clad Hamasniks in progressive enclaves. The only force now capable of saving America from the woke mind virus is the church. It actually really is that simple. But church attendance has, of course, been declining, and Christians are repeatedly told they suffer from excessive, quote-unquote, privilege. Ending separationism as our regnant paradigm can help end anti-Christian hostility, embolden individual Christians, and fortify the church. American Jews themselves have a duty to support all of this. It is imperative that Jews and Christians unite to defeat our common civilizational foe, which is wokeism, that necessitates making the public square hospitable once again for expression of authentic biblical religiosity, which in turn then requires the formation of a Jewish-Christian anti-separationism alliance. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.